Hello, everybody. Welcome to Philo Sapiens, where religion meets reason. And today, again, we haven't had a Hindi Urdu stream in a long time, but with me is Mahatin, and that's why it's an English stream. So, welcome, everybody. How's everybody doing? And what we're going to do, as always, we're going to pick one of the video clips from Muslim apologists, and we're going to review. And this time, what we have is Dr. Shoaib Malik. I'm not quite sure. I think, as much as I remember, he was probably in Dubai or something like that. He's originally from Pakistan, but now he's based in UK. And as Mahadan told me, he has done philosophy of science, studies in philosophy of science, or he teaches that. I don't know. But welcome, Mahadan. How are you doing? And
Yeah, I'm good.
to everybody, Eid Mubarak. All right, Mahadan, go ahead.
yeah, I'm not sure whether if if exactly. Don't quote me on it. If it's philosophy of science, everybody can Google it. But from memory, I think he's studied in one field of philosophy at a higher postgraduate level, possibly PhD, and he's possibly taught the subject in a university context. I think something like that. So he's clearly informed to some extent of academic philosophy. Having said that, clearly we disagree with very many people who hold academic philosophy credentials. I mean, Shoaib probably disagrees with the vast majority of philosophers, because most philosophers are atheist, right? At least outside of the philosophy of religion. And there's multiple reasons for that. Lots of people like Keith Augustine, who was a philosopher of religion, left the field because he just thought it's dry after he kind of finished it. And so most philosophers who do end up becoming philosophers, they kind of leave the topic of religion because it's no longer useful philosophy, right? And what happens is
Right.
that a selection effect goes on, where the people who are interested in theology and theological matters, they become the philosophers of religion. So there's a bit of I would say, a disproportionate number of theists in the philosophy of religion, whereas most of those philosophers who are atheists are just simply don't engage in the philosophy of religion anymore. They kind of go elsewhere, like the philosophy of mind, metaphysics, epistemological issues, or meta-ethics. Most meta-ethicists are
Yeah,
atheists.
metathesis. Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Okay, Madan, I'll just chime in and say hi to Techman's Tips. He said hi to you as well as Khayali. By the way, Techman's Tips, you forgot to say hi to me. But anyways, hi, big hi back to you. And you're asking when is Hindi stream? And yes, unfortunately, we don't have a Hindi stream because Khali is busy, and so most of the time, two of us, Mahadan and I, get together, and then it's English stream because Mahadan is still learning Hindi, Urdu. But I'm just kidding. Yeah, Mahadan is never gonna learn Hindi, Urdu. Probably. Yeah, Mahadan understands a bit of, I think, Urdu, and he can understand, but I don't think he can speak. But so yeah, all right, back to the topic, and let's add this. So just give you a little bit of background here. I think he started probably a four video series. Dr. Shoaib Malik started four video series where he's probably just talking about atheism and why atheism doesn't work out, and he has given so first two videos were just outlining atheism and where that whole movement started from, and in 3 and 4 he's going to give solid reasons why theism or probably Islam is makes sense, and he's going to deal with it philosophically. So he's going to present the arguments that support Islam or Christianity or theism, basically, right?
Mhm.
So let's start it from wherever we are. Basically, at this point, I heard and I couldn't see anything substantive till this point. So let's listen to it.
Of it. Yes. So me flying at will is a logical possibility, but it's not scientifically possible. I hope you're not beginning.
So instead of listening all the way, going back and listening to him, he's just giving what is contingency, right? So he's defining contingency, and before that he's defining what is two different terms, basically what is possible and what is necessary, right? So go ahead, listen to it.
You need to appreciate that difference between these two things. Similarly, when you think about that question about eating, can I live for a year without consuming any food whatsoever? Scientifically, impossible. Logically, it is possible, right? And now you can kind of see, this is where the discussion of miracles starts kicking in. We know, that there are laws of nature in place, and we know that seas don't split apart. We know wooden staff don't change into things unless there's some external intervention. But we have in scripture that these things occurred. So we know that these things are logically possible, even though they are not scientifically possible. So let's take a step back, okay? Right now, we have, at least as a minimal concept, we've been able to differentiate between scientific possibilities from logical ones. And you should be able to know that scientific possibilities are a subset of logical possibilities. Logical possibilities are very broad. You can think of all kinds of things, even though they're not rooted in science. But all scientific possibilities must be logical. That's just the way the nature of the relationship is. Everything in science must be logical, but not everything that is logical is necessarily scientific. Miracles being a prime example. So far, so good? All right, bismillah, let's carry on. Now, two more terms, and then we can get into the argument. There's a reason why we had to appreciate that difference between logical possibilities and scientific ones. And that is because we want to now start understanding the term contingency. That is a word that I want you to be able to appreciate and munch over. Contingency means that you can imagine something to be other than what it is, not against the benchmark of what is scientifically possible, but against the benchmark of what is logically possible. So take this cup, for instance, right? I can imagine this having other properties, other configurations, other designs. All of those are logically conceivable for me, no problemo. I can imagine human beings differently. I can imagine them having different limbs. I can imagine them having different, extensions of certain body parts, no problemo. I can imagine the universe being different. I can even imagine, the certain planets having different configurations. All of those are logically possible. And as a result, all of those are contingent. So to really hone in on the definition, a contingent thing or a contingent being are realities which could have other properties, such as, being blue or white, taller or shorter, right? Or even failing to exist. I can imagine a world where there are no human beings. That's possible. I can imagine a world where there are no planets. That's also possible, right? So anything that you can imagine for it to be any other way is contingent, right? This should be contrasted with something called a necessary being. A necessary being or a necessary thing is that it inherently cannot be other than what it is. For instance, the very first question that we looked at in that question set, 1 + 1 is necessarily 2. Cannot be 3, cannot be 4, cannot be 5, because otherwise it's a contradiction, right? Contradictions are really the benchmark for what we can and cannot accept. We do not accept contradictions manifesting in reality, right? So if you recall from the second session that we had last week, I mentioned two examples. One of them was, can 50% be bigger than 100%? No. Logically, it's contradictory. Can you have a squared circle? No. It's a logical contradiction. I'll give you a third example. Can you have something that's completely black and completely white at the same time? No. Logical contradictions, right? Logical contradictions really inform the height of how far we can think of. And this is how we are able to understand both necessary beings as well as contingent beings. These are the things that we use to make sense of reality. That everything that is logically possible has to be either contingent, it could be other than what it is, or it's necessary. It is intrinsically the way it is, and it cannot have been otherwise. If you've
All right, Madan, do you have anything to add to it? So one thing, I'll just clear my throat over here, all right? So, and
Before you proceed, you're funny because you ask me and then I get ready to talk and then you
oh,
talk.
you want to go ahead? Okay, go
No,
ahead.
no, it's
Because
okay.
I thought you
I
you
have,
didn't interrupt. That's why I thought probably
no,
you,
it's not that.
as of now, you don't
I've
have
got
anything.
no, I've I've gotten used to the pattern, right? So you ask me and then I go, I unmute and then you start talking, so then I'm muting in. Well, go
All
on,
right,
go on.
all right,
It's carry on. You say your bit, then I'll talk.
all right. So the first thing I want to highlight over here is there's a very deep meaning to these definitions, basically, right? And what it is basically. So when you say 2 + 2 = 4, That's that's definitionally true, pretty much. And so when you define a necessary being, you define necessary being as definitionally true. I mean, how would you otherwise define it, basically, right? And that's why anything that you're talking about contingent, we can see contingent thing could be logically, something that could be logically something else, pretty much, right? And that's why you'd say apple could be, instead of red, could be green, or could be blue, and that's a you can think of it that way. So that's a logical possibility, and that's why you say it's a contingent thing, pretty much, right? But so far you haven't given any sense as to why something has to be necessary, basically why something can't be any other way. At least from a logical standpoint, I can say anything could be anything other way, could be in some different way, unless until then that thing is something that can't just change, basically, not even in consciousness, not even in mind, not even in any of its attributes, right? And so far, at least in my mind, I can't think of anything that can have that kind of a property. And a creator even doesn't fall into that category, because for a creator to be a creator, it has to create at some point, and that means it has to change. And you can think of it from not changing to something else, pretty much, right? And when you do have those properties, basically, kind of, then you can say that that thing is contingent as well. At least this is my thought. I wasn't really able to express my thought very clearly here, but maybe audience understands what I'm trying to say over here. In a nutshell, a creator, as soon as you say it's a creator, it becomes, in my mind, it becomes contingent.
Hmm. Okay, but maybe I disagree with you a little bit. Maybe I don't understand fully what you said, or you can clarify later. But before we do anything, Valentino Celeste Orlando, I think a long-term viewer and a massive contributor under our YouTube comments, which means he's a big fan. So shout out to you, Valentino, because you've been a big contributor.
All
You've
right, yeah, Madan, can I stop you? Hey,
Go ahead.
Valentino, and I think you wrote in one of our probably comment section under one of our videos or streams that you wanted to join and have a conversation. So if you want, I'll make the link public. Just give me a thumbs up, and then I'll make the link public for you. Go ahead, Madan. Sorry.
Yeah. No, so I just wanted to give him a shout out because he I suspect it's a he. I think it is a he. I've never actually thought about whether his gender, but I think he's a man. Although it's hard to tell these days. But yeah, so thank you for your honest feedback and being a fan, and not only being a fan, also being in alliance with us, helping us, tackle comments or even give additional feedback and elaborations under the comments. I think I've engaged with you a few times as well. I've engaged with some of your posts on free will, for example. So clearly, keep up the good work, and we would actually enjoy probably talking to you live at some point if you wish to come on. Anyway, getting that out of the way. Yeah. So what do I agree with based on what you said? Let me just clarify. What I think Shoaib is generally kind of right in what he's saying, or roughly speaking, but so a necessary being. So you said a necessary being is something that is by definition. It's kinda. I mean, I would say that it's by the very nature of the concept, right? And what I mean is, I'm not just defining it into reality like that. Think about it this way: imagine a triangle. I didn't just define it into reality. I kind of discovered a triangle, right?
Yeah. Okay. Let me try to explain it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
So the
let me
necessary being. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just elaborate. Let me
So
just elaborate first.
yeah.
So if you have a concept of a triangle, right? That concept of a triangle will be such. If you just imagine the shape of a triangle, it could never be a square, right? If and it could never have less than three sides. All else being equal. Sorry, more than three sides or less than three sides. But it could probably be green, right? So the greenness of the triangle is not, essential to it, but the three-sidedness of the triangle is somewhat essential to it, and it can never be any different. And that's kind of what we mean by a necessary being, right? It's not necessarily the case that I just defined it as such, because I could try and define a tree. I could try and define, let's say,
Yeah, but
yeah,
the difference, Mahadan, here is triangle we know is constituted of something. As soon as you haven't defined any constituents of the necessary being, once you define the constituents of a necessary being, then the same problem that you have with the triangle would arise there as well, because now you have defined the triangle with three sides to be a triangle, basically, right? Definitionally true. Right.
say that
For
again.
a necessary being, you haven't given a definition. All you have done is a tautological definition over here, right? A necessary
No,
being, there is something that is non-contingent, basically, right? That can't be otherwise.
so it's not
That's
just
the problem
that.
I'm having. That's the problem I'm
No.
having. As soon as you map something on from reality to it, at that point, it'll become contingent. That's the objection I have,
Yeah,
right?
I'm
You
still
see.
not sure what you mean exactly. So a necessary being will be such that it
Okay,
must be
so
true.
necessary being. Do you think necessary being can have properties,
So the concept
attributes or properties?
the concept of something being necessary, just means that it has to
No,
be the case.
that's why I'm saying the concept. I'm not talking about concept right now. I'm fine. I'm with you on concept. Just the concept is just definition right now, and that's why I'm saying it's a tautology, right? But as soon as you try to map it to on reality, that's when the problem arises, right? So just the definition that a necessary being is something which cannot be otherwise. I agree here with you, right? And with Shoaib as well. And that's
Mhm.
perfectly fine. So if that's the only contention he has, I agree with him, right? But as soon as you say that
He's not.
necessary being has to be a creator, now there is one
He's
attribute
not.
you have
So
added.
he's not gone to that point yet. So he's not made that argument for that yet. So
Okay,
without
okay,
listening,
okay. No, then yeah, maybe I went a step
because
too
he's going
far,
to whittle
basically.
for supposedly, if he makes an argument for the contingency argument, he's going to whittle down to why a necessary being has to be a god, and he'll try to show that that can be the only necessary being in terms of maybe a causal force in the universe or something like that.
Yeah,
But
that's why I'm saying. If maybe
we have an
maybe
additional argument
yeah, yeah. I
for that.
went a step further, basically, right? In
Yeah.
that sense,
So,
basically,
but,
yeah.
but the point of something being so when he says a tautology, well, all sort of
Definitional
tautology.
statements are tautological, right?
Sorry.
All sorts of definitional statements are tautological. Is that true?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, yes, but yes,
A
but that
bachelor,
doesn't mean.
a bachelor is a person who's not married. It's a
Mhm.
tautology, right? In a sense, basically, that's how you
Yeah,
define it.
yeah, but the thing is that doesn't mean that you want the mere fact that something is tautological um, doesn't mean that you aren't realizing something that is true in reality, right? So if something is um, can be logically possible to be otherwise. For example, it's very possible that a rock can be green, or a tree can be smaller or shorter. Then you can think that that element of that tree is contingent, in the sense that it's very possible that it can retain its um, it can be logically possible otherwise in a different universe or something like that, in a logically possible world. So it's an easy example is that it's logically possible that the tree doesn't exist, right? It's logically possible. It's logically
Yeah,
possible
but
that
yeah,
I am 1 foot taller, and it's logically possible that my skin color is
is
a
it
bit.
is it logically possible that a triangle is a square in some different
Yeah,
universe?
that would be the case. So it's not a universe; it's a possible world, right? So
Possible world, yeah, possible world, basically, right?
yeah,
It's a possible world,
so
possible universe, maybe.
yes, a square can't be. So we're not really talking about real universes here. We're just talking about possibilities, right?
Yeah,
And
that's the question, basically. In a possible universe or a possible world, a square can be a triangle, or a triangle can be a square, right? That's a
cannot
possibility,
be,
right?
cannot be. Yeah, it cannot be.
It cannot
It
be.
cannot be. Yeah.
Even in a world where paraconsistent laws of logic are at play.
So that would be a different conversation, right? Whether or not
No, I'm saying it's a possibility. That's why I'm saying it's a possibility.
Sorry, what you saying?
Any other world does not have to adhere to just the laws of logic that we know, basically, right? You assuming that all the laws of logic and all the possible worlds are gonna be just the same as we have here. I don't think that's gonna be true.
Well,
I
that
don't
will
have
be.
any way to prove that, but I just can't assume that to be a true fact.
Yeah, I
Of
mean,
the
well, you're introducing a different kind of line of argument here, where you can talk about paraconsistent logic, and so on, which is a minority view, I suppose, but it's a view, and it's a slightly different. It's a slightly different type of view than what we think. It doesn't actually paraconsistent logic doesn't really say that squares can be triangles or something like that. Although I'm not completely informed in inconsistent logic, exactly. But what I'm saying is that for the purposes of what Shoaib is highlighting and articulating, it's a generally sound kind of distinction to talk about in terms of possible stuff, what's possible and what's impossible. Like you can't really think of a square being a triangle at all, right? Whereas you can think of Mahdeen being taller, or being paler or darker, or having a slightly different complexion, and still kind of me being myself, right? I could have been somebody who was a bit taller than I am right now, right? That's a possibility. It's not a physical possibility. It's not a technological. Well, there's a technological possibility as well, perhaps.
scientific possibility.
Yeah, maybe it's a possibility, but it's
No,
at least a
you're
logical.
saying technological. I think the word he used is scientific possibility. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm using the word technological possibility as well, because I think a technological possibility is a subset of scientific possibility as well. But whatever the case, the point is a necessary entity, something that is necessary will be true in all possible worlds, right? And something that is not necessary, contingent, won't be true in all possible worlds. It could have been different, right? It could be different. It could not exist, etc. And for the purposes of that is fine. I don't think
All right. Yeah.
paraconsistent.
Let's move. It's just to get us moving on from this point. I think let's assume that that's the definition, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that you could try and define something as necessary, like water, right? But it wouldn't work, right? Because I could still imagine water not being necessary. Whereas I can't imagine a triangle having four sides. And that's really the kind of motivation behind it, right? Whereas I can do my best to tie into the concept of water necessariness and build necessariness into water, right? This water is necessary. It must be true in all possible worlds. But wait a minute, I can actually imagine a world where there isn't any water, right? Whereas I can't imagine a world where 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't equal to 4, or I can't imagine a world where if there are triangles, that it will be square or something like that. And I can't imagine it being the case, even if there isn't any physical triangles, that the concept of a triangle would not have three sides, right? So you could say there are definitions, but for the purpose, that's it. I mean, yeah, it's an intellectual kind of distinction that you can recognize, right? So you can build into the concept of something that is contingent necessariness, but you could still perform the thought experiment where you can lose its attributes, and it will no longer be necessary. Whereas you can't do that with triangle or a square, right? I can't, for the life of me, I won't be able to imagine a square being a triangle. But for the life of me, I can easily imagine myself being a bit
Yeah,
taller.
but I think there's a distinction. You can't imagine is not necessarily does not negate the logical possibility. I'm saying you can't
What do you mean?
you won't be able to imagine does not negate the possibility, right? Or a logical possibility, I'm saying, right? For all we know, human brains are very limited in their imagination. I mean, anything higher than 4 dimensions is extremely hard to imagine. And yet they do exist, basically. We know that they do exist, right? So, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's possible. That's possible.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it wouldn't completely eliminate the thrust of what he's talking about, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah. I mean, broadly, I'll go
yeah,
along with him to see his, argument further on, basically, right?
yeah. Because I mean, push comes to shove, he may even accept the fact that this might be limitations of our brains, etc. But that doesn't mean you can't still have a general kind of leaning towards the idea that this is a healthy kind of dichotomy to have, right? To know what might be necessary versus what might be contingent, etc. Without a stronger objection to collapse of that distinction.
Right. Yeah, otherwise, it's gonna become messy. I do agree with that. Let's take this. What is it? It's a comment by Det Inspector Monkfish. Logical necessity is one thing, and it's clear what it means. But the whole idea of metaphysical necessity is dubious and extremely controversial. The apologists switch between the two concepts. I agree in a sense. Yeah. All right, Madin. Go ahead. Shall we run the video further?
Just run the video. Yeah, let's just run the video.
And then we'll be able to see how that feeds into the argument. I want you now to start the argument. So let's get to that. So I'm going to ask you 5 more questions, and then we'll be able to see how that feeds into the argument. I want you to think of apples. Are apples contingent? Yes or no? Clearly, we can see apples being another way. We can imagine them having different properties, different sizes, therefore they're contingent. Excellent. Can we imagine human beings being another way? Yes, we can, right? We can imagine them in different colors, different shapes, different configurations. We can even imagine a world where they don't exist, hence they're contingent. Can we imagine the planet being another way? Clearly we can. I hope so, at least. Number 4, solar system. Can we imagine the solar system having different planets? Yeah, we could have been in a solar system where there could have been 20 planets circling the sun, right? We just happen to be in one where there are 8. There were 9 when I was younger, now it's 8. Pluto has been kicked out, so right, maybe it might come back in again. And number 5, can you imagine the entire universe being different than what it is, right? And the answer is yes. So what did we conclude from that? We concluded that the universe and all of its constituents are contingent. And this is the starting point for the contingency argument. So we've done the preliminaries, which is where we looked at into what is the distinction between logical and scientific possibility. And now we're getting into contingent and necessary. And we are working with the assumption now the universe is contingent, and we want to see where this takes us. So if you've been following me so far, and I really hope you've been able to do so, let's start by asking a simple question. Where did this contingent universe come from? Now, theoretically, there are only 2 options on the table. The first option is that it caused itself, right? The second option is it was caused by something external to itself, right? Now, let's evaluate those 2. Let me ask you a question. Can you create yourself? I'm assuming most of you would say no. We were not created by our own selves. We were created by our mothers. And in turn, they were created by their mothers. Can the universe create itself? Well, think about it. The universe creating itself, or even you creating yourself, it would mean that you or the universe would have to exist and non-exist at the same time. And if you recall earlier, I said that we do not believe that logical contradictions are true. Logical contradictions are pretty much the benchmark of how we assess reality. When we say that the universe created itself, what we are fundamentally saying is that a contradiction is true. And that is something we don't accept. So therefore, if we are able to rule out the universe created itself, it then means the other option must be true. That is, there's something outside the universe that created this contingent thing. So then we get to that other thing. So we know that the universe was created by something else. Fine. Now the question is, well, this thing here, is that self-caused? Or did that, was that created by something else? Now, clearly, we agreed that nothing can be self-causing. So then we go to the third thing in the chain. Was that self-caused? Or was that caused by something else? And then we can imagine there's a chain forming here. Now, at this point, the question is, can that chain go on indefinitely. I want you to think about dominoes. I'm assuming that most of you know what dominoes are, but if not, just imagine a stack of blocks, right, with circles on them, and you can then search on Google what dominoes are if you don't know what I'm talking about. If it was a generation thing, I'm not sure if it's popular now. Now, imagine this. So you have a stack.
Yeah, I mean, before he starts talking about infinite regresses and etc. What's that fallacy called where you say it's either this or that? It can't be one, or I think that's a false dichotomy fallacy.
False dichotomy or either or fallacy, basically.
Yeah. So what he says here is so what explains this contingent fact or something like that, and he tries to build an argument towards it. So everything that I said about what might be necessary, what might be possible, etc. I think when you start thinking about things that are logically possible, it informs you in some sense of what you can imagine being different, right? I don't think you can move from what's logically possible to what is actually physically possible. And this is, I think, what kind of the contingency argument kind of makes in terms of as a mistake, right? So whilst it might be true that the universe may not have existed because it's in the logical sense contingent, in the sense that it could be otherwise, right? It has no impact on whether it could have actually been otherwise, right? So all we're talking about in terms of a logical possibility is that there could have been, for example, instead of rainwater being this clear transparent liquid, it could have been red liquid, right? But let's not move now from the logical possibility to the physical possibility. It's physically impossible for I would imagine pretty much physically impossible, right, for water to be anything else other than the way it is, right? And that might be due to the laws of physics, in fact, right? And if we think about it that way, I mean, I'm not talking about water being necessarily like that in every aspect. It's possible that water could have been a little bit different in many other respects, right? Boiling point or melting point could have been different. Some scientists think that is the case in some respects, but I don't think its transparency could have been different. I don't think it could have been a red liquid. Or let's think about the speed of light or something like that. These are physically necessary, right? Etc. So whilst it's logically possible that the speed of light could have been much slower, it's not physically possible that the speed of light could have been much slower, right? Some people might disagree with me there. That might be my lack of physics knowledge. But if it doesn't apply to the concept that I'm talking about, find something else in science that really is like necessary, right? Physically necessary. Whatever applies as an example of physical necessity. Even if it's logically possible, it could have been different. It's physically not possible. And I want to think about it like that. Whereas what he's trying to say is that the universe could have been different. Therefore, it must have a cause outside of itself. That is where I stop. All this logical mumbo jumbo and all this, what we can think of as logically possible has no bearing on what is physically happening. And I want to keep that in mind, right? For the most part, maybe you could make arguments that from what I know about what's logically impossible, that it because it's broader than physical possibility. Therefore, something being logically impossible means that it can't be physically possible either. Like it can't be the case that philo is philo and not philo at the same time. This is a logical contradiction, right? And that tells me something about the physical world too, right? That I find somewhat persuasive. But what I don't find persuasive is to think that it's logically possible that something in the universe could have been different, or the entire universe could have been different. Therefore, it's physically possible that the universe could have been different, and therefore there was some physical kind of force outside of the universe that made it the way in the particular way that it is. I think that is a move you can't go to, and I've said this before in previous streams. Right? You can't go from the fact that I can imagine that the universe is being different. Therefore, there must have been an external cause or causes that made it such that the universe was in this particular way rather than any other way. and because I don't have any good reason to think that, right? Because logical possibilities have a very finite effect, finite force on really telling us about the physical world, or what really is physically possible, what really physically cause something, what really, I can imagine, for example, the reason why, I can imagine the sun being made up of fire, but it's not. I can imagine, it's not made up of fire; it's thermonuclear. And I can imagine a crocodile giving birth to a human being, but that's not biologically possible, right? So whilst in some senses logical possibilities do inform us about what might be physically possible as well. Like philo can't be philo and not philo at the same time. It has a very limited impact apart from those sort of statements. Apart from these sort of kind of undergirding kind of reality bounding statements that are just not possible, right? Going the other way around, which is going from I can imagine this being different, therefore it could have been different, is no more different than me saying that I can imagine the tree getting up and talking to me, therefore the tree can get up and talk to me. That's absurd, right? No, we need to look at the science. Can trees do that? No, trees can't do that. And in similar vein, even though it's logically possible that the universe could have been different or something like that, it doesn't mean it's physically possible that the universe could have been different. Just like the tree it doesn't mean the tree can just get up and start talking, right? Even though it's logically possible that that tree can have consciousness, it's possible. I mean, I could imagine a tree one day getting up in my imagination and start talking to me with sentience. That doesn't mean that's physically possible. Of course not. And similarly, just because I can imagine the universe being different, it doesn't mean it's physically possible that it could have been different. And that's all. That's what I care about, because I care about what's physically possible.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Maybe you already talked about these two objections that I had in mind, because I was busy in reading and commenting and stuff. But one of the things is, I mean, this is always one objection that theists and especially Muslim apologists pose to atheists and all sorts of agnostics, is that can universe give rise to itself? Why is this concept so hard for you to stomach? It's not impossible for a universe to give rise to itself. And what it means, if you think very carefully about it, it could be a universe within a universe within a universe within a universe within a universe. It's not at all highly impossible. Even at some point, a lot of the cosmologists had hypothesized and still do that black holes could act as singularities for another Big Bang. That's a hypothesis. There's no evidence for it so far, but still it's a possible hypothesis, right? And what it does is universe gives rise to itself, basically. And you can say, no, it's not exactly the same thing, because it's like a mother and child, basically. It's like mother-child. Yeah,
he's not
but
talking,
then...
he's not talking about that sort of situation. So he would say that's not the universe giving rise to itself. He would say that's the current universe being given rise.
But the problem is the definition they are giving is they are taking a logical problem and quoting it over the physical universe. They're saying a universe can't give rise to itself. Now, what if you just take that sentence into its meaning? You can say, okay, yes, in this sense, what I have just mentioned, in that sense, universe can give rise to itself. But when you add to that a universe cannot exist and exist at the same time, now you have created a different problem altogether. And that's the trickery that these guys do, basically, right? And the other problem that I wanted to say, that you just forgot the whole possibility of universe having existed forever, pretty much, right?
So
all it did was metamorphose. Let me finish. Let me just finish it, right?
Yeah, go on.
So all it does is probably it just metamorphosed from one state to the other. Maybe there was a space before space-time manifold. There was some manifold of some other thing or something else, right? So the other thing that he's pointing at, the causality, you don't even have to go into causality as well. I mean, you can have a causality, you know, you know, extending back to eternity, probably, you know, an infinite series of causality. There's no problem. There's no logical problem in having infinite series of causality as such. Sorry, Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean he's not gone to the point yet where he's talking about. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, he's not gone to the point yet talking about an eternal universe, but I think he's progressing towards it because he's talking about an
I
infinite
thought he
regress.
started talking about infinite series,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Did we stop him in between?
that's right. We stopped him in between. So first of all, he's not finished his options yet, right? He's not
Oh, okay,
finished his.
okay. I thought probably he did.
No, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. I don't because we stopped him mid-speech. I'm not sure he's finished his options. Two, he may think that an eternal universe and infinite regress are very similar, but they're not the same necessarily. But he might think they have. He might go into articulating the distinction soon, right? So I don't want to. I don't want to say that he's not thought about the option without listening to all of what he's about to say, right? And but what I would say is that what you said regarding the fact that it could be that as a black holes give rise to other universes, and he would simply put that in the category of infinite regress of successive events or preceding events. I mean, we're thinking about it backwards from our time, so preceding events or successive events. If you want to think about it from the beginning to now, then it's successive events.
Yeah, the problem is that one of the options that he has given is a logical impossibility, basically, right? Why put it over there in that case? Basically, that's the problem
He's
I'm
trying to rule
having.
out the possibility. So he's trying. So there are some people who say that the
Universe
universe.
can come from its. I mean, see, if you that's a trickery in my mind,
Okay,
basically.
maybe
That's why I'm
maybe
saying.
okay.
That's why I'm
I think
exposing him that it's
I
it's
think
a trickery. It's not an option.
yeah, maybe you're
You
right.
don't have to
Because I
go to
think
that option because you have definitionally excluded that option. But then why keep it on the table? Pretty much, right? You have definitionally excluded. Only if you had only said that can a universe create itself? Maybe there is a model in which a universe creates itself, but it doesn't have that logical clause of having existing at the same time not existing, basically,
yeah,
right?
because when you say a universe, so it's he might be misrepresenting what people mean by therefore the universe created itself. But grammatically speaking, when you say something, the apple created itself, right? What you mean the apple made itself, right? The apple created itself. That apple created that apple, right? If you take it in that commonsensical way, and if now this could be a miscommunication between the scientific community and certain people like himself, where when people say the apple created itself or the universe created itself, they mean something different. They don't literally mean that the universe, you know, um, didn't exist and then the universe existing created itself. But that makes weird. That sounds weird, right? And it sounds contradictory. Maybe that's what the scientific community doesn't mean by that, and therefore it's a grammatical or easy to misrepresent idea, right? Why
Right.
he's
That's probably what's happening, I think. Yeah.
why he's eliminating it off the table is just simply just eliminating the possible options, maybe, because there are some people who do mean it like that and they don't understand maybe the repercussions of when they mention something like that sounds so grammatically straightforward, where you say something like something created itself, right? Whereas you can easily say it with your mouth that the universe created itself, but when you imagine that the universe created itself, then you have to think that it wasn't created, but then something that wasn't there created itself, right? But if you imagine that it wasn't there, then it can't create itself because there's nothing there to create itself. Yeah, so that sounds a bit like a contradiction. Or you might imagine that it just came out of nothing, right? That it created itself. What we mean by create itself, that there was nothing and then something came or something like that.
Yeah,
So we need to
that's
tease it
why I'm
out
saying
exactly.
that concept is definitionally he's playing in my mind at least, I'm saying that it's a misrepresentation of somebody, at least from the scientific community, who say that universe can create itself basically. And they have two different things in mind basically when they are talking about universe. When they are talking about this space-time manifold, they are saying there might be some different condition of the universe in which the universe might be existing in a
Mm.
different state, and from that state
Mhm.
universe created itself
Yeah.
basically, right? So those are
Yeah.
two different things. Yeah.
Yeah. So unless scientists have a very different understanding of why they use it, and therefore they're using the word terminology like that, I would say even the scientists are being misleading somewhat by saying the universe create, because you don't have to describe it like that in order to create a susceptibility in or audience members receiving it like that. You could just simply say that there was a prior state where there was another sort of universe or state of the being from which this universe arises. But that wouldn't be like the universe created itself, like it
Yeah,
assembled
yeah. I
itself.
think a better terminology would be to say that universe is eternal, pretty much, right? Has always
Or something like
existed,
that.
or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that. Something like
yeah,
that, pretty much. Yeah,
yeah. But I'm
that'll
not
make it
100%
much
sure.
easier. And then
Yeah.
you can say this particular representation of our universe with the space-time manifold was created by some other form of universe which had a different state than the current space-time manifold, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And
Which
then
would
probably the scientists are more accurate than in representing
yeah,
this whole
yeah.
thing.
So
Yeah.
which would for him therefore fall under the category of infinite regress of causes, right? And then
Yeah. Yeah.
he's about to comment on that. So let's just hear what he says.
Yeah. Sure.
Of blocks here. Can that stack of blocks ever create itself such that it topples by itself? Not necessarily. You need something external to that set to start the blocks tumbling over, right? Something outside of that set must be there. Similarly here, when we think of this set of contingencies, there must be a termination point, a stopping point. Otherwise, we say all of this came out of nowhere, right? And clearly, we don't work. We don't work with the assumption that reality behaves that way. We do believe things have explanations for why they exist, with the way it exists. So, if you believe that there must be a termination point, well, voila, we've reached the conclusion that we were striving to get at, and that is the necessary being. Now, you may think, hang on, that's a big step. We went from contingency to the termination point. And Shoaib, you're saying that termination point is the necessary being? Like, yeah. Well, why can't it be contingent, you may ask? That's a completely valid question. The reason why that termination point cannot be contingent, because if it was, then we would need to ask a question, where did that contingency come from? So therefore, that termination point must be something, an entity that itself was not caused by anything, was itself an unchanged entity, and therefore, remember what that definition of necessary being was? Something that cannot be otherwise. Something that did not have to come into existence, something that is intrinsically, inherently fixed as it is. And that's where you go into the necessary being. So let me take a step back in case things got confusing there, because I'm sure it did for some of you. We started a series of questions that led us to believe that the
All right. There you go. So now he does finish the whole, causality chain, basically, right? So now it's okay to comment on it. Basically, I did say a few things on it already, and these guys always give this example of Dominoes or Hilbert's hotels or Benedetti paradoxes and whatnot, basically, right? One of the assumptions over here is you have to have a first cause somewhere in the chain. Let's say for dominoes to fall, let's say a domino at number 10,000,010,010 to fall, the first domino has to fall, basically. But if you guys think through it carefully, those two problems are not synonymous, basically. I mean, you can't equate that kind of an analogy and apply to the causation chain of the, let's say, universe, basically, or arriving at the present in the universe, basically, right? Through a causal chain, right? All you need to say that every moment has a moment prior to it, or every effect has a cause prior to it, pretty much, and that's about it. There's no contradiction, right? And this chain can go on forever and forever, pretty much, right? There's no contradiction. For Shoaib to show that that's impossible, he'll have to show why it's a problem, why there is a logical contradiction in this hypothesis that every moment has a moment prior to it, or every effect has a cause prior to it, or even I'm not quite sure he included explanation. I think those should be taken differently. Explanation have a different meaning in contingency arguments, and causes have a different you know meaning in contingency arguments. So I think those two should be separated, basically, right? But at least that's my thought, that you can still have an infinite chain of causal, cause and effect going backwards, and yet you can arrive at present. You can think about it as a time, as coordinate axis, right? Anywhere you move the zero of coordinate axis on the negative axis, you can always have negative numbers extending up to infinity. But at some point you'll have a zero where your coordinate axis rests, and you can pinpoint that this is zero. This is right now, pretty much. Right? I'm not quite sure if I was able to explain that pretty easily, but present works like that. You are at zero on the coordinate axis, and your causal chain extends to the negative x, basically, pretty much. Madan.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea of what you said, that the example that he gives of a domino doesn't really apply to the universe or something like that. I don't think the example that he gave about the dominoes applies to itself. Forget the universe, right? So the idea, I mentioned this in the last stream as well, so it's just a repetition of that. I mean, the idea that the dominoes won't tip over if the prior domino before it. So imagine there's a dominoes falling, right? Obviously, if dominoes are falling, you need each domino in the sequence to tip the one before it, right, for it to fall. So if you imagine a finite sequence of dominoes, and you have like 10 dominoes, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 domino. For the 10th domino to fall, you need the 9th domino to fall. For the 9th domino to fall, you need the 8th, the 7th, the 6th, the 5th, the 4th, the 3rd, the 2nd, the 1st to fall, right? So you need some tipping over from the 1st to hit the 2nd to hit the 3rd, etc., right? And you kind of get that situation. So if it has a beginning, like the 1st tips over, clearly then the 10th will tip over as well. But if you keep imagining now that you've got not just 10 dominoes, not just 20 dominoes, not just 30, but you don't have a first domino, right? You have an infinite number of dominoes before that 10th one or something like that, all the way up to infinity. You're going backwards and there's just no first domino. Then without a first domino falling, you're not going to have the dominoes falling. You're not going to have that 10th domino falling, or the 11th domino falling, or the 12th domino falling. And that's what he kind of means. So he's trying to say it's logically impossible for the dominoes to move through successive addition, successive tipping over, without there being like a first, because otherwise you're just not gonna have any dominoes falling over. So you can't have like an infinite regress of causes because there's no first cause. And what I said to that was, that if you imagine, if you even just staying to the topic of dominoes, you don't need to apply it to the universe. Even just staying to the topic, true to the topic of dominoes tipping over, what you instead of imagining the dominoes waiting to be tipped over because there's no first domino falling, you have to imagine that everywhere on this chain, no matter where you go, there's dominoes tipping over. Everywhere you go on the chain, no matter where you go, there are dominoes that are being tipped over. How did domino number 1,500,000? I'm getting the numbers wrong now. Just start with 1 million. How did domino number 1 million tip over? Because the one before it did, right? How did domino number 545 tip over? Because 544 did. What about 544? Because 543 did, right? And if you just keep asking that question forever, right? Through a regress. No matter where you go, what number you pick. And at this point, numbers become kind of meaningless. Numbers become arbitrary because we have infinite almost, right? No matter where you go on the chain, however far you go from one point to another point, any finite point of that chain, any finite number on that chain to another finite number, there's that many number of dominoes tipping over. Right? If you think about it this way, then what you have is a situation where dominoes are always tipping over, and every single domino on that chain is tipping over. So there's no longer a need for a first domino. Yeah, because there's always been a domino prior to a domino that's tipped over. I don't know what sort of mathematical language you can describe that as. You can just say prior to n number of domino, there was always another domino tipping it over, right? It's like a
Yeah,
little formula.
that's why I gave the analogy of my coordinate axis, because on the coordinate axis, no matter where you shift that coordinate axis on the negative side of the axis, basically, right?
Mhm.
On the x side, you'll always find the zero to be there where you shift the coordinate axis to, right?
Mm.
And that's your present, pretty much, right? And that's what the causal chain is, pretty much, right? You don't have to have a first, you don't have to move all the way to infinity, right? Basically, you'll always have a present at some point in the coordinate axis, no matter wherever
Yeah,
you are in that coordinate axis, right?
yeah. So you could say that numbering is just a bit arbitrary here because where we place the zero is just
It's an arbitrary, right? Our
relative.
present is arbitrary as well, in a sense, right? You
Yeah,
can
it's
always say
relative,
that our
right?
present
Relative
is
to where we
arbitrary.
want to be. So
Yeah.
if you have an infinite number of dominoes, which one is the first domino? Which one is number one? Which one is
Yeah,
number
there's
two?
no first, there's no
There
first
is no
there.
first. There's no
There's no
number two.
concept of a first.
Yeah. If we start counting a finite section of this infinite chain, we may be able to arbitrarily assign it numbers, right? So if I pick anywhere on this infinite chain of dominoes, 10 of them, then I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But that really isn't number one. That really isn't number 10. That's just an arbitrary point that I picked. And from there, I've assigned it an arbitrary frame of reference using numbers. But reality is, numbers become meaningless in these sort of finite numbers become almost meaningless in an infinite chain, right? So it's just at this point it becomes relative and arbitrary to point out any single one of these numbers, one of these dominoes, and say this is the first, or this is the third, or this is the 44th. The point is every single domino has another domino before it falling. Is that logically possible? Yeah, I don't see any contradiction in that because I can imagine sitting around infinitely forever thinking about counting each of these dominoes and seeing that there was one before it that fell that caused the subsequent to fall. Right? At this point, you don't need a first domino to start the sequence. The sequence has no start. It has always been. It's always been, and in this weird, mysterious, strange world, the dominoes have always been falling, and that's all you have to do. There's no contradictions in that, and by doing this, you've salvaged the possibility, the logical possibility, the metaphysical possibility of an infinite regress without contradictions, because the theist here is begging the question by thinking that there has to be a first event, because he's not through any sort of real logical precision, thinking that the dominoes are sitting around waiting to be tipped over because there has to be a first one. That I like I said in the last stream is a psychological illusion, right? You don't, instead of thinking about it as dominoes waiting to tip over, think about it as the dominoes have always been tipping over, and all that shift in perspective makes it logically possible.
Yeah, that's true. But these guys can't just imagine that something has been the waterfall always had water in it, basically. There was no point in time that there was no water in waterfall, basically. You see the point? It's
Yeah.
been always going through, that's the thing, right? I don't know. I mean, no matter how many analogies you put forth over there, these guys are just gonna ask the same question pretty much. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, I think I'm just commenting on Eid. Yeah.
Mm.
Did you have sheer kurma on Eid, or did you have baklava? I asked Bilal, what did you have for? Did you have sheer? And he said, no, I don't even know what it is. And so he said, we have baklava. And so he's from baklava land, and that's the Mediterranean dish, by the way.
By the way, Bilal, just to comment on this, I'm not trying to ignore the dietary conversation, but I think this is far more interesting. That's why, because we're doing a stream on philosophy. There is another Muslim who's called Petrit Kola. I've actually had I don't know if you remember, Philo. We actually engaged with
I remember we had a conversation on our comment section after our conversation with Sean, probably, or Daniel Hakikaju review, and he was very nice initially, and then towards the end of that conversation he became really combative, basically. And then he said he would join us in some of the streams and have a conversation, but then we never saw of him, basically.
Yeah,
And
and I
he used to have a channel, by the way. So
yeah,
he's someone from I think Midwest in America, and he converted to Islam, and then he went to study in Mecca or Medina, probably Medina, right? And yeah, so we'll try and see if we can review that that video. But I think we have done so much of Youthifro in past 1 month that I'm already sick of it. At least I won't touch it for another month or two.
yeah. So I wrote to Petrit Kola a long, lengthy response describing in vivid detail the issues with divine command theory and Euthyphrodalema and whatever you want to call it, and so on, all the objections. And he said he will respond, and he never responded. So that tells you everything, right? So so when push come to shove, and when I detailed an essay on his video, when he was talking in it, in the thread, he was there in the thread, present with us. He was debating and engaging Kylie, Philo, and then I came along and I went in complete detail, long essay. That was the last comment I think that I left on the thread, and he just never came back. So if he's making videos about Euthyphrodalema or something like that, I very much doubt that he's dealing with the things that I've said properly, because he didn't deal with it then. He literally just
Yeah,
left.
I think there is one problem that whenever we respond to these guys, some of those what do you call these guys who comment a lot about us not responding, and then when we do respond, you or I or Callie, right? Then there's just a very cold response. There is no response, or ad hominems, basically, right? Or no show, pretty much, right? So
Yeah,
that's what happens, pretty much.
yeah. So
And anyway,
Petrit Kola,
Madan, just before you go, shall we make the link public so anybody who wants to join
yeah, maybe if you want, yeah,
can
yeah.
can come in, guys? I'm gonna make the link public, so if you feel like having a chat, please do join us. It doesn't have to be a talk about philosophy or anything. It could be just a general question or an argument or whatever you may feel like talking about. All right, so I'll make the link public. Sorry, Madan, go ahead.
Yeah. So far that what we've commented on is the idea that a contingent universe, in the sense that it's logically possible to be otherwise, has no impact to tell us whether or not it could have actually been otherwise. Therefore, we can't go from philosophical sort of thought experiments. This is why I don't think the contingency argument really takes off. We can't go from philosophical thought experiments to determine that there must have been some sort of external causal force that made the universe one way or another. I think that's a question of physics, not a question of philosophy. And we can't. And although we may be able to commentate some sort of, we may be able to make some sort of philosophical kind of sharpening with philosophy. Philosophy is involved in that. It can't make really groundbreaking discoveries about whether or not there had to be a cause outside of the universe, whether the universe could have been any could have been different, right? So what I would do is distinguish between factual necessity and metaphysical necessity, right? So it could very well be that the universe is factually necessary. It could be that the initial conditions of the universe are eternal, and factually necessary, meaning that by factual necessity, we just mean that it physically couldn't have been otherwise, right? And there's no prior cause, right? It physically couldn't have been otherwise, and independent as well. Let me just add another aspect. It's independent, factually necessary and independent, meaning that it's not dependent upon anything else. It has no other cause, right? Now, is it the case that it's metaphysically or ontologically necessary? No, it's not, because I can, again, through logical thinking, imagine that the universe be different, right? So imagine if the initial state of the universe is this some sort of quantum field, and that quantum field physically couldn't have been otherwise. It's also independent, meaning that there's no other cause before it, and that was just eternally there, forever, right? It can't change. Or maybe it can change, but change within itself, like in itself or something like that. But there's nothing before it, right? So that's factually necessary. Now, can that be different? Is it logically necessary? Is it metaphysically necessary? Ontologically necessary? No, it's not. I can imagine it being different, but it's factually necessary. And because I've said that whatever we think is metaphysically or logically possible doesn't really impact whether it's physically possible. What we should really care about whether something is factually necessary or not. And if it's factually necessary, like a quantum field is factually necessary, then the fact that I can imagine it being otherwise doesn't mean that it could have been otherwise. Actually, in the physical sense, it just means it's a thought experiment that it's possible that it could have been otherwise. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. It's possible it could have been otherwise. I can't move from that. And I think it's a non sequitur to go from it's possible that it could have been otherwise. Therefore, it could have been otherwise. Therefore, something else was causing it to be this particular way rather than another way. All of that is entirely just not a plausible conclusion that I think you can go to.
Yeah, it does not warrant any serious, consideration. I mean, it can warrant some consideration, but not as serious a consideration as
any more than that. The plants could have been it's logically possible plants can grow arms and become a conscious being, right? It's logically possible plants can have consciousness.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
logically possible plants might have they may sing songs. It's logically possible, but I can't. That's all I can say in terms of logical possibility. Yeah, I entertain the concept in my imagination, but it has no impact on the real world of whether or not plants can actually do that, right? And that's all I mean. I can't go from the fact that plants could have been otherwise like this, and therefore something caused it to be differently distributed. I can't do that. What tells me that the plants has a cause behind it is the fact that we know plants have causes, right? Again, through science. It's the fact that when we learn about plants, we learn that plants didn't just come out of nothing or ex nihilo. There's a very systematic science of evolution telling us
there's a process. Yeah, there's a natural process that it goes through, right?
Yeah.
All right,
I didn't just think about. I didn't just come to that conclusion through contingency versus necessary arguments. I came to that conclusion through looking at the science.
Right. All right, Madan, we have Bhaiya and Bhaiya on the back screen in the back studio. Shall we finish this in just maybe a couple of minutes, or shall we take him first and then?
Well, just get him on the stream. Yeah, just if he has a question, we can have him for about 5-10 minutes.
All right. So, welcome, Bhaiya. How are you doing?
Today only in English. No other language?
Yeah, no, it's only in English. So if you are comfortable with Hindi, then I would request you to join when we have a Hindi Urdu stream, basically, right? Because if the language is a barrier, I think no one is gonna enjoy the conversation, right?
Yeah, I understand English, but not fully command on English. But I understand whatever you both are talking about.
No, but
I understand.
see. Let me tell you one thing, right? And there's a respect involved. If you feel like, all right, I apologize in advance. See, since we are having deep philosophical conversations, I think if there is a communication barrier, then it's gonna be even harder to understand the concept. Not for us,
Yes.
not only for us, but also for audience as well. So maybe
Yes.
if you want to join, maybe join the Hindi Urdu stream, right?
Okay. I have an
If you have a
important. I
question,
have
just
an
pose the
important
question.
idea.
If you have a question, then just pose the question, and maybe we'll just answer it, and then
Yeah,
if you want, you can
we'll
leave.
give you a Zakir Naik answer. Yeah, we'll just let you ask the question, and you'll answer it, and then we'll tell you to go. Yeah?
I want
One
to
question.
I want to
No
say
response.
something.
Yeah.
Very little time I take. Your precious time. I know your time is very precious.
Yeah.
I only take very little. So if you stream in Hindi or Urdu, then your reach is far, very far. You go. You take a audience, many more audience. Means English. It's good in language, no problem. But if you want to expand, then English, Hindi or Urdu is best medium language for your channel, your view, reaching to more people. This is my humble
Yeah. I
request. This
mean,
is my humble idea for you.
yeah, totally. I mean, we do Hindi Urdu streams as well, and it happens so that we have more time for English streams than for Hindi streams, right? But I totally agree to your point that we should do equal number of Hindi Urdu streams as well as English streams, right? So that we can
Yeah.
reach both audience on the English speaking
Because
audience as well as
because Hindi is a language like India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, many country people
totally.
understand English. It is a very multinational language. So if
Multi-country language. Yes, yeah.
multi-country.
Okay.
If you want to expand, then
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we get your point, right? All right, yeah. So let's see you in our Hindi Urdu stream, right? We'll talk to you then, right? Yeah,
okay.
we'll talk about something more. We'll talk about
Thank you.
something different, right? Okay,
Okay.
cool. Good.
Best wishes
Nice,
you
nice.
and Mahadin. Best wishes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Talk
Thank
to
you.
you later then. Bye.
Thank you very much. Keep it up.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Anybody else wants to join? I think April did say she wanted to join, but seems like she's where is that? I might do. That's where she said, right? And anyway, do we have a comment that we can talk about? Let's see. What does that Inspector Monkfish says? The kind of speculative metaphysics that the contingency argument relies on is rejected by scientific anti-realists. So there is also a conflict between two common positions of apologists. All right. Yeah. Why don't we just finish this?
Yeah, let's finish the stream.
Yeah.
Universe and its constituents are contingent. So far, so good. We then talked about, all right, this universe, what caused it? And we said there are two options. Either it caused itself, or it was created by something external to it. Okay, so far, so good. We also said, however, that it cannot be self-causing because self-causing means it's a logical contradiction. And that is something we do not accept in any metric of reality. We just do not. As a result, it must be caused by something external to itself. So if we follow this reasoning, then we ask, okay, this contingent universe, this must have an external cause. We ask the same question, is it self-causing or was it caused by something else? And you can keep going on and on and on. Now the question that emerges from this, can this chain go on indefinitely? And we reach the conclusion, not really. If you put in, a stack of blocks, clearly the blocks cannot topple themselves. Something outside of that must have externally touched that first block for it to all topple over. In other words, there must be some termination T object. If we get to that necessary being, then you've pretty much done part one. You really have, right? That perhaps this chain is infinite. Is it not possible? And is it not possible that perhaps this chain is infinite? Is it not possible? And that's a completely valid question, right? So let me give you something to think about. On the one hand, you can challenge that question head on. You could say, well, are infinite concepts really coherent? So I'll give you one example, and I'm not going to go through every single, counterexample out there. Just think of one example. In mathematics, infinity plus 1 is infinite. Okay. Infinity plus 2 is also infinity. Okay. Infinity plus infinity is also infinity. Okay. Now let's go the other way. Infinity minus 1 is infinity. Infinity minus 2 is also infinity. So some people claim, some philosophers claim, that the very nature of infinity it has no coherence whatsoever. It's a black hole. Doesn't really make much sense. And so because of that, this idea of an inherently, infinite set just does not seem to exist, right? And there are other examples out there, but I suspect if we start entertaining those for this session, at least while in Ramadan, maybe a bit too much for us. So I'll leave you with that counterexample if you wanted to challenge infinity head on. But let's say that infinities were to exist. Let's say for the sake of the argument that this chain of reasoning can go on. Okay. Now the question that emerges is, what about the nature of this set, however? What about the nature of that set? And I want to transpose us to a more concrete example so that you can maybe get where I'm going with this. I want you to imagine we have a library. Now that library has books. So imagine a library that has an infinite number of horror books, okay? Not an infinite number of comedy books, okay? So the question is, why does this library have just horror books, an infinite number of horror books? Why not comedy? Why not romance? Why not religious books? Why specifically that? In other words, even if there was an infinite set, like we're talking about here, it still forces us to ask the question, well, where did that specific configuration come from, right? Because remember, contingency means you can imagine it being otherwise. If you can imagine an infinite series where you start with our universe going on indefinitely, you can imagine another series where perhaps we have our universe being created by several other things, similar to where we have a library with an infinite number of horror books versus a library versus an infinite number of comedy books. So if you've been able to follow that, fundamentally the conclusion is, even if that entire set was infinite, it still requires an explanation. So whether you want to accept that this chain cannot be infinite, hence you stop at a termination point, or even if you want to say there could be an infinite, it still needs a necessary being. The nature of that necessary being means it has to be uncaused, cannot be caused by anything else, cannot experience change because otherwise it'd be contingent, cannot be in time because otherwise it'd be contingent. Remember, time also means that you are a contingent entity, right? If you were experiencing change in time, you are a contingent entity because you were in one moment at one point in time, you were another moment, another point in time. So this termination point must be such that it cannot experience change. That entity must be intrinsically the way it is, similar to 1 + 1 is equal to 2 and cannot be other than what it is. So let's take a step back to summarize everything that we've said in this.
Yeah, he has said a lot, and I thought just pause it and go through what he has said so far, because otherwise it's going to be too long. So one of the things that he said is that, infinities cannot exist because of the kind of contradictions that you get through when you try to add, something to infinity or subtract something from. Basically, the kind of operations that you would do on numbers, if you did similar operations on infinities, then you get the kind of absurd results, basically. And that's the property of infinity. You have to understand that, basically, right? You cannot do willy-nilly mathematics on infinities, basically. That's what your Cantor did. Cantorian mathematics or Cantorian theory, basically, is based on infinities, basically. And I don't remember, and I pretty much am sure that Cantor never denied that infinities could not exist. I don't think so. And I could be wrong. I would say if somebody is listening and knows about it, can tell me that. But I'm pretty, I would say I'm as much certain as I can be that Georg Cantor never said that infinities could not exist. That's a problem. And then he admitted to that even if, let's assume that infinities is a possibility, you can't have this universe rather than some other universe. That's again a fallacious argument. It's a damn bloody fallacious argument. Who says that you have to, This now you apply anthropic principle over here, right? You can have some other kind of universes as well. Who says there can't be other kind of universes as well? Of course, your universes are you yourself are saying universes are contingent, basically. You can have multiverse kind of thing, pretty much, right? You can have other kinds of universes elsewhere. You can have infinitely different universes as a possibility, pretty much, right? And maybe within our whole universe, we have seen the observable universe, but beyond that, within the unobserved universe, you can have different possibilities as well. I'm not quite sure. I mean, what do you mean by this universe? If you're talking about the universe with electrons, protons, quarks, leptons, and whatever you may have, these fundamental particles, then maybe this is our universe that is made fundamentally by these fundamental particles. But you can have different universes with different fundamental constituents. Why not? Yes, it's a possibility for sure. Right. So I'm not quite sure as to how he got from those things to just that necessary being. He just latched on to that necessary being for some reason. I don't know, Madin. We already spoke about it quite a bit, I think, Madin.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we just finish that?
This session, we talked about in the very beginning about two kinds of possibilities: scientific possibilities and logical possibilities. We concluded from that question said that scientific possibilities are things that we know through science.
Right. At this point, he's just summarizing his whole conversation or whole, lecture, basically, or clip. So I think we are done over here. Anyone who wants to join in and have a conversation, April, Debt Inspector Monkfish, Bilal, whoever else is there. If you want to have a conversation, cordial conversation, join in. And
Yeah, let me just mention something though, because I do want to represent him accurately, right? What he was saying regarding the fact that if you do have, let's say, a regress of events, an infinite chain of events, or infinite number of things happening, or infinite number of entities, why should it be those entities than any other? So that comes from the understanding of contingency, right? Because if it's logically possible, what he's saying is, if it's logically possible that the chain could have been different, then that would make the chain contingent. So if you have an infinite regress of events, right, now then you may think you've solved the causal problem. Now you've got every single causal entity explained by one before it, but then the entire chain is contingent simply because that chain could have been different, right? And that's what he's trying to say. So I just want to represent him properly. So if you have that sort of situation where you invoke a chain of events or an infinite set of things, why should it be those things other than any other thing? Because that would make that chain contingent.
yeah, and that's why I'm saying that there could be multiple chains. There could be infinite chains, pretty much, right?
Yeah, but
all are contingent. All are contingent. Infinite contingent chains, basically, right?
Yeah, but
that's a possibility, right?
So he would say that's still contingent, right?
Yeah. But
so
once you have agreed to an infinite, possible infinite chain of contingent things, you can't now get to say that no, I don't want that infinite chain of contingent things, right?
No, but
I mean, you can say that why not this one or the other? Then for that, the answer is you can have infinite chains, different chains.
Remember, the argument is that if something is contingent, then it must have something causing it, right? So there has to, it can't basically you can't terminate on a for him. You can't the terminal point.
But that's a presupposition. That's kind of
that would be a different point though, right? That would be going back to why should something contingent have why should something being contingent mean that it can't be factually the stuff that I said about factual necessities, right?
Yeah, but
that would be regarding that, right? But something being the mere fact that you can think of an infinite number of different things being contingent will still make it contingent, because you can still imagine them not being
Yeah,
that way, not
but
existing.
why is there a principle that you have to get back to a necessary thing?
Yeah,
It's a question
yeah.
begging, basically, because that's what you are set out to prove, basically, that an infinite chain has to end somewhere, right? You have to prove that, and you just can't assume that in your premise, pretty much.
No, at this point he's not saying that. At this point,
Yeah,
that he's
no,
not
but
saying
this
that.
the response you're giving him for him
Yeah.
is giving that kind of a hint,
No,
in
no,
a
it's not.
sense,
It's
right?
not, because we're not saying that the infinite chain needs to end somewhere. The infinite chain doesn't need to end somewhere in this situation.
Right,
So
right,
he's accepted the idea. Fine, if you imagine that there is infinities can exist and there's not an
right,
unending infinite chain. The point is
right.
that the entire collection of events, even if they're
Yeah,
infinite in every respect, would still be contingent, because it could have been otherwise, and therefore,
yeah,
because it's logically
perfectly
possible.
fine.
Like, yeah.
Yeah,
So
perfectly
therefore,
fine.
all he's saying is that if something is contingent, therefore it needs necessary. You know, and the way to tackle that is to attack the why should something being contingent here, which is that it's logically possible being otherwise, really have an effect to really give us reasons to think that it could have actually physically been different, right? Or there must have been a cause outside of it, or something must have caused it, right? Etc. You still need to address that part, because he's not saying he all, because he's saying yeah, he's not soon as, because he's set it up in such a way that contingent stuff needs an explanation behind itself. So what he's not
I
articulated
think
here is the principle.
there's a hidden assumption in his saying that, basically. I
Yeah,
think
no, no,
so.
yeah, yeah. What he's not articulated here is the principle of sufficient reason. Maybe not in this stream. Maybe he's talked about it somewhere else or something. At least in what we've seen, I've not heard him say the words "principle of sufficient reason," right? Which is that, either something has an explanation within itself, or the explanation outside of itself, right? And contingent things, he would probably say,
Oh,
need
but
an explanation
contingency
outside of
and
itself.
explanation, these are two different things, aren't they? I mean, you can have something, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is.
yeah,
But the principle of sufficient reason motivates why contingent things need an explanation outside of itself, and motivates why necessary things don't need an explanation outside of itself. Right? So in this scenario, a contingent, a an infinite chain of causal events that are all dependent upon one another, right? And etc. Will still be contingent, given that it can be imagined to be different. And if that's the case, and it qualifies to be contingent, then the principle of sufficient reason now does the work. The principle of sufficient reason comes along and says, if something is contingent, then it must have an explanation outside of itself, because it's not necessary. There's no, unlike 2 plus 2 has an explanation within itself, and unlike the triangle has an explanation within itself why it's,
yeah.
uh,
I think then we I think if that be the case, we kind of might fall into strong PSR or weak PSR kind of debate, basically, right? Someone might come and say, no, I believe in weak PSR, and so I do accept that there are certain things which cannot uh, be explained, basically. And they would argue that if there is such a chain of contingent things, an infinite chain, then of course there are some events which cannot be explained, right? Because in the infinite chain there'll be certain parts of that chain that just don't have an explanation. They just are contingent, basically. That's about it, right? So
yeah.
I
But you
think,
mean brute
yeah,
facts?
this,
So you mean like brute facts that are just,
yeah,
yeah.
they could be,
Uh,
but in an infinite chain, how do you arrive even at a brute fact? Basically, it has no end, right?
well,
I mean, we are not reaching to a one thing as a brute fact, basically, right? Because it's an infinite chain extending all the way into infinity in the past, basically, right? and whatever that
No,
past may mean, right? This sans time space and
the brute fact would be, because if you reject the
no,
PSR or
brute
something,
fact
or
could be sorry, Mahajan, sorry, go ahead.
if you reject the PSR, the brute fact would be why the chain is like that rather than any other way, right? That why the chain exists in the first place would be a brute fact. It has no explanation. It just is.
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah,
That would be a
totally.
brute fact, because if
That would be a
if you
brute.
go down that line, because the proponent of the non-brute fact contingency argument, who's saying that they cannot be brute facts because of the principle of sufficient reason, would be saying, since the chain could be imagined to be otherwise, it's contingent, and therefore it's because contingent things need an explanation outside of itself. The chain needs a cause or an explanation outside of itself.
Yeah, but then strong. I think both ways there are problems basically, right? Even if you go through the strong PSR, then you again are stuck with a brute fact, as in the necessary being. Why necessary being, basically, right? And then that's again a question, right? You're stuck at there. What explains that necessary being? It just is. It's a brute fact, basically, right? That's the thing. Even for a necessary being, I'm saying with both the PSR, strong PSR, and weak PSR, you still have
So
you still are left with problems to tackle.
if it's a truly necessary being, that the idea is that it couldn't have been false in all possible worlds just by its concept alone. Like, so it's a real case of a necessary entity would be such that it can't be false on all possible worlds, and therefore it's not contingent, right? So, and therefore it won't be a brute fact. So a brute fact would be like a brute fact would be that the trees are green, and you just say trees are green. Obviously, it's very possible that trees may not have been green; it could have been blue, right? But it might. So you may say, therefore, it's contingent, but it's just a brute fact or something like that. To get to in order to kind of avoid
what you explained. What you explained is yeah.
in order to avoid the need to explain it through a external cause, and you'll just say it's a brute fact that it's green and has no external cause for it, right? Because although the greenness of the plant could have been different, it's just a brute fact that it is green. That's kind of like a brute fact type of argument. Whereas if something is necessary, it'll be something like 2 + 2 = 4, and that will be the case in all possible worlds. And that's not a brute fact, right? It's a necessary fact. It just necessarily is so that 2 + 2 will be 4 in all possible worlds. So brute fact is different. When we say a brute fact, we don't mean that it's just a fact that we just accept. It's a very philosophically specific definition. When somebody says a brute fact, they're actually acknowledging and admitting that I can imagine it being different, right? I can't imagine a triangle being a square. I can't imagine 2 + 2 = 8, but I can actually imagine the plant being the tree being blue, but it's just a brute fact.
Yeah. I see the objection. Yeah, I understand. The objection was not in terms of contingency or non-contingency, right? Right now, what you're saying is perfectly makes sense in terms of contingency, right? I think I'm taking explanations to be different. I'm taking the explanations to be different, right? And so I'm correlating explanations in terms of PSR, basically, or PSR in terms of explanation, basically, right? And in that sense, I'm saying that you required for a necessary being as well. If you're asking for a explanation in terms of a brute fact, then you have to answer that same question for a necessary being as well, right? In terms of explanation, not in terms of contingency, right?
right?
I agree. A
So
brute fact could be otherwise, basically, in terms of contingency.
yeah.
It could have
So
been otherwise as well.
well, if it's a true candidate for something being a necessary be, keep in mind when it's a necessary entity. I'm using the word necessary entity because as soon as you think necessary being, you might be thinking about a conscious agent. I'm not thinking about that. I'm talking about anything
No,
that
no, no.
qualifies.
I'm not thinking about that as well.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
just saying necessary being or
As soon as
yeah.
if you can think of something that is necessary, right? It's distinguishable from a brute fact in the not in the sense that a necessary thing doesn't have a cause. But in the sense that a necessary thing doesn't have a cause by definition or by its concept or its nature, whereas a brute fact isn't like that.
Yeah, totally.
You have to this is therefore, and
So
a necessary thing is not a
so
brute
so the
fact.
thing is, okay. Let's agree
I want
on
to
one
emphasize that
thing.
because you said no, because you said before, if there is a necessary being, then you can still say that's like a brute fact. I just wanted to make a separation between the two things. That there is a difference.
No,
There
I
might be a
said
similarity. Yeah.
it might still require explanation. That's what I said in terms of PSR. Maybe if I said it's a brute fact, then maybe I misspoke.
Okay,
What I
maybe.
meant was
What
from in terms of strong PSR, you'll still require an explanation for necessary being as well, right? If you're adhering to strong PSR, right?
yeah, maybe. Maybe. I mean, you can think of it. Think of it like if you think that if you think the first cause of the universe, let's say, was a necessary thing, and it must be true in all possible worlds, it might lead to model collapse in the sense that then if it's the case that A is necessary and then B is necessary, then C is necessary, then the universe is necessary. Therefore, the universe must exist in all possible worlds. And in that sense, you know, a necessary thing clearly has a cause outside of itself as well, in the sense that I am necessary now. I am necessary on all possible worlds, right? Because the first cause, which is necessary, is also the case on all possible worlds. It could not have failed to exist, even on one world, right? It's logically and metaphysically necessary. It's not merely factually necessary. It's logically and metaphysically necessary. But if it follows from that, then you do, and if you think that the subsequent events are also necessary, because if A must produce B necessarily and B must produce C necessarily, then everything on the chain is necessary. Then it leads to model collapse because all of it's necessary. So this will happen in all possible worlds. There is no other way of anything happening, right? But clearly you can see also that I am also dependent upon the first cause. So now you have a situation where I am dependent. Yeah. I have a cause outside of myself, yet I am also necessary. Right? So I am dependent necessary. Whereas God, if you think it's God, or if you think it's like a first physical cause, that would be independent, causally independent, and necessary. Whereas I am dependent necessary. If that's what you mean, then certain in that sort of sketch that I've done, some necessary things do have
Right.
are
I think we need to make distinction between these three things basically, and maybe we'll talk about it some other time. First thing is contingency. Contingency is not the same as explanation for something. Basically, maybe explanation for Mahadin's existence. That's not
no,
contingency.
contingency is not an explanation. Yeah, contingency is not
Yeah,
an explanation.
that's why I'm saying no. I'm just saying for explanation, basically for everybody, right? And the third thing is dependency. Basically, the Islamic philosopher, as much as I remember, use the concept of dependence and independence instead of concepts like uh, contingent or necessary beings, basically, because those two are, at least in modern analytical philosophy, these three things are taken differently, and they are not. Sometimes they are probably taken synonymously, but as far as I can tell, they are distinct. But Madan, you'll tell me whether these three things are same or distinct. But we have our old friend joining us, so let's talk to our old friend.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you all doing? And happy
Oh,
Eid
Good.
Mubarak.
walaikum. I think Madan is not Madan. Madan, you recognized him or not?
Yeah, why wouldn't you recognize him?
Okay. I thought since he doesn't have his name written on. Okay, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. It's been a long time. I'm pretty sure you're back in your home, right? Celebrating Eid.
No. I'm actually staying in my hostel right
We can't
now.
hear. I can't hear you properly. Madan, can you hear go properly?
Not clearly, not clearly.
Go.
Is it clear now?
Yeah, better. All right,
So
go ahead. What do you want to add on to the conversation?
I would just say that the Islamic philosophers make a distinction, basically. So according to them, I think it's contingent. It is equidistant with regards to existence and non-existence. Okay, so
Ukba, your
as
voice
Madan
is
said that
again
when you
gone down. I can barely hear you. I heard you when you said, "Can you hear me now?" I heard you well, but then again your voice has gone down. Can you bring mic closer to your mouth?
okay, so is it
Yeah,
clear now?
now better. Now better. Yeah, now better.
Yes, so I was just saying that the Islamic philosophers say that for a thing to be contingent, what it means is that its essence should be equidistant with regards to existence and non-existence. So you need an external preponderator to prefer
Mhm.
either its non-existence or existence, basically. So once
Okay,
you have that external,
so as far as I remember, even in there, I think who started off this contingency argument was it Ibn Sina?
Ibn
I
Sina,
think Ibn
Ibn
Sina
Sina,
started
yes,
the contingency argument among, yeah, that was in ninth century, I think 10th century, sorry, 10th century,
yes.
right? And there his concept, I think, as much as far as I remember, was the dependence and independence. So this concept that we use in today's analytical philosophy, modern analytical philosophy of, contingency and necessary being, I don't think they had that, but I could be wrong.
What I would say is that it's actually interesting that Avicenna predates these distinctions, the further
Mhm.
distinctions of necessary dependence and necessary independence, which I have seen
Okay,
in Rasmussen's and Philippe Lyon's book, basically.
okay,
So
okay,
these
okay,
four distinctions are actually present in Avicenna, all
okay,
of them.
okay, okay, okay. All of
Yeah.
them are there.
So
Okay, okay.
Avicenna is basically a necessitarian. They
Oh,
follow a
he's a
strong
necessity,
PSR.
and that's why they kicked him out. That's why they called him a heretic, pretty much, right? I
Yeah.
think
So the
a lot of
Mutakallimi or
the
the theologians
right.
think that the strong PSR basically eliminates the divine freedom or the
Right,
divine
right.
libertarian conception of free will.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was telling Madan as well, right? I mean, that's what how I was thinking of it basically. But
Yes.
yeah,
But their
um,
view is actually pretty strong because they think that if you employ a weak version of the PSR, then
mhm.
it would imply a type of potentiality with respect to God, because then God would have some part of its essence, some part of its will unexplained. Okay, so if
Right,
you are having brute contingency on part of God, then why shouldn't one be an atheist and adopt a model of a brute contingency, basically?
right.
So
True.
it really relies on the intuitive force of the strong PSR. I mean, of course, one can reject it, but it just feels so strong. I personally,
That's why I said there are problems on both sides basically. Which
Yeah.
one? Which
But
one
yeah,
to pick? Pick your
yeah,
poison.
yeah, but these problems arise when you want to give God the free will or the choice. That's when those problems arise. But it doesn't arise on any sort of necessary being, right? I just wanted to kind of emphasize that if there is something necessary, and you think about it this way: if you're an atheist and you think there's a necessary beginning or something, necessary first cause, necessary independent, there's no issue for you to bite that bullet and say it's just necessary. It's a problem for certain theists who want to have God's choices, for example, to be freely taken, right, and not necessary, right? And therefore, some people might want to bite the bullet and go, it's just a brute contingency. But that's an issue, right? Once you've accepted that bullet, then you have an inconsistency. You're accepting a model where you can have brute contingencies. Why can't atheists have brute contingencies? But why did the theist accept this model of brute contingency? Because they wanted God to have the free will or something like that, if I remember correctly, right? That problem doesn't arise in any sort of necessary thing, right? If you have like a universe and you have like a quantum field and you just say this is necessary, let's say it leads to model collapse, and what? Yeah. For the atheist, this is not a problem. For the theist who wants to retain consistent with his theology, it's a problem, right? Because he wants to give God free will and free choice and all the God's creation abilities, that sort of kind of contingency, so that you say it's not necessary or something like that. But then you've introduced a problem where your model, what you've been trying your best to avoid, would you been pointing fingers at atheists at, by saying that you can't just accept something contingent, you have to accept something necessary, right? You gotten rid of that, because now the theist is accepting something contingent, right, or a brute fact or something like that.
Yeah.
That's
So
where
I
the
was just pointing.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that a naturalist can adopt a necessitarian form of naturalism, basically,
Yeah.
with this strong PS, with while also accepting the strong PSR. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the Islamic philosophers have something additional to it. So they believe that the universe is eternal, okay, and everything is necessary. But what they have additional to it is that to explain this universe, you also need an immaterial series of intellect, which ultimately leads to God. But
Mm-hmm.
these series of immaterial intellects, these are the realm of the unchanging or the immutable. So where they really have the problem is how to relate the immutable with the transient, with our transient universe. That is where their problem lies. So that is why if one adopts a necessitarian form of naturalism, then their argument really seems a problem, faces a problem with this. And also one can adopt an indeterministic form of causation. So a necessary initial singularity indeterministically chooses a possible world basically to actualize. That is how Joe Schmidt has replied to some of the Thomistic models basically which have tried to incorporate the PSR. And Khalil Andani has mentioned this in one of his papers, where he says that if one adopts an indeterministic version of the divine will, then it leads to providential collapse, that God doesn't have control over what outcomes to actualize, basically.
All right.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, just wanted to emphasize that this is a problem for theists more so than problem for any sort of necessary entity. And I just want to emphasize that it's very possible to have a necessary entity in the way that in the modal sense, not just in the factual necessity, and it not creating any tensions or problems or brute fact. Like the idea that Philo was trying to say is that you could still question what caused the necessary thing. And I want to say that by definition, the necessary thing, we're not looking for that. We're not looking for those external causes to the necessary thing, because the necessary thing is necessary, right? But for the theist who wants to kind of salvage this a particular type of theological kind of idea of God, they do have that problem, because they don't want to say that they don't want to entertain the model collapse. They don't want to entertain the fact that God, any part of God's will was such that it was contingent, that it came through randomness or something like that, right? But then the pressure towards that, because to say it's necessary, kind of will conflict with their theology.
All right. Yes, true that. Yeah, I think what yeah, I think we'll talk about it further because there's so much to talk about this whole topic. I think we have talked about it many a times, and it's hard to grapple all these concepts. But we'll shut down the stream for now, and unless until somebody joins in like next 10 seconds or so. But anybody who listens to it will request that you like, subscribe, and share, and also
Before you shut it down, let me just quickly add a comment about something else Shoaib said that we didn't address, which is the fact that you can subtract things from an infinity, and it leads to contradictions. So if you subtract all the prime numbers or something, well, the even numbers, you end up with an infinite, right? Even though you've taken away an infinite.
I did briefly mention that the Cantorian.
Yeah, you mentioned it there. I want to mention something
Yeah.
else though, because I think that might not be applicable to the universe. I mean, I think that all of these kind of manipulations of an infinity highlight that manipulating an infinity has an issue. If you have a typical example is if you take away all the even numbers, you end up with all the odd numbers, and you basically taken away an infinite set from an infinite, and you're left with an infinite, right? But then if you take away all the numbers above 5, the number 5, all the numbers above number 5, again you've taken away an infinite set, but this time you're left with 5, right? So in this situation, in the first situation, you've taken away an infinity and you're left with infinity. In the second situation, you've taken away an infinity and you're left with 5. But what's going on there? That's a bit strange, right? Some people may say there's a contradiction there. I don't think there is, but I'm not going to comment too much on that part. But I'm going to say let's just bite the bullet for a minute. I don't think this is true. I can go into the depth of why is how we can think about this while salvaging it's completely logical and possible. I don't think it's impossible at all, particularly if we accept Cantor and understand transfinite mathematics and understand how infinities behave differently. We're not talking about finite sets, we're talking about infinite sets, and how infinite sets behave is very different. Subtraction, addition doesn't apply in the same sort of way. But I'm not going to comment on that. Instead, let's accept indeed that is contradiction. Indeed, there is contradiction there. Let's just accept it for a minute. There's a hypothetical acceptance, by the way. Let's accept it. Yeah, what it shows is that when you start manipulating an infinity, subtracting things away from it, adding to it, taking away like prime numbers or odd numbers or whatever, then you have issues. But can you apply that to something like the universe or Hilbert's Hotel or something like that, right? The problems of Hilbert's Hotel, to the universe, and a lot of philosophers have said no, you can't, right? What these thought experiments like Hilbert's Hotel and subtracting, adding to an infinity shows that if you do those things, subtract, add, manipulate, remove, then there's a problem. But when it comes to the universe, you can't subtract, let's say, a time coordinate, right? You can't subtract. So if you imagine an infinite chain of events in the universe, you can't subtract 1978 away from, right? From the universe chain of events. You can't subtract anything away from it, right? You can't add to it either. You can't, etc. So what these thought experiments like Hilbert's Hotel show is that manipulating, adding, subtracting from infinites leads to hypothetical potential contradictions, metaphysical problems. But for the universe, you can't take out a space-time coordinate. You can't take away 1978 or 1984 from the history of the world, right? And if that's the case, then there's no issue anymore. Because if the issue is with the manipulation of infinities, you can't manipulate the universe like that. You can't just take a section off and away. Therefore, there's no problem.
Yeah, I think in short, what I would say is what Madan is trying to say is that having these operations on infinity, you cannot have a conjunction of certain conditions with the infinity and say that infinities can't exist, basically, right? And same is true with the causal chain. Basically, a certain condition, you can say a conjunction of these certain conditions is happening, but there is no logical contradiction in them, basically, that
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah.
infinite causal
Imagine
chain cannot exist.
imagine an infinite chain of dominoes, right? Now, if I start taking away all the odd number dominoes, I've taken an infinite away, and I'm still left with an infinite. If I take away all the dominoes above number 5, then I'm left with 5, and I'm leading to kind of contradictory results, even though I've taken away an equal number, right? But imagine the following. Imagine if I set the condition that you can't take anything away. Imagine if I set the condition you can't add anything. Imagine if I say it's logically impossible in this special type of set of dominoes to remove all the dominoes from above the number 5, or let's just say it's logically impossible, yeah, to take physically impossible. Let's say, sorry, actually, physically impossible to take away, not logically, physically impossible to take away all the odd numbers of dominoes. Now you don't have a situation where you can take anything away, and now there's no issue anymore. If you have these dominoes that you can't remove, add anything to it, now all you need to think about is whether or not it's possible to have an infinite number of dominoes, just like that. And if there's no contradictions in that, then there's no issue. The issues arise when you start removing things from the dominoes, right? Adding to the dominoes, then the issues arise. But the issues don't arise if you can no
Yeah,
longer add
you're
or remove.
talking about conjunction of events that can't happen, but independently those events can happen. That's in a nutshell. But anyways, Madan, I think we should close the stream. We're touching 2 hour mark. So thanks everybody for joining. Like, subscribe, and share as much as you can. Support us in whatever way you can do. Buy me a coffee, Patreon, and super chats, super stickers, memberships, however you want to support us. But at least share, if nothing, at least share our content to wherever you can. And also subscribe to our English only channel, that is @Unveiling Faith. We haven't streamed on it for a long time. And also we are missing our other co-hosts. Saeed dropped by today, and Kali's will drop hopefully in another stream next week, in the Urdu stream, or possibly in English stream. But until then, see you guys later. Bye bye. All right.